Okay, so obvious place to start would be how you got into the IT industry. Was it something you always wanted to do? Did you arrive by accident? Just, yeah, give us some idea of how it all started.
So when I was a teenager, I think year 9 or 10, my dad introduced me to a Pentium 1 at that point. And I had only ever seen a computer. And it used to be 486s and 386s in those times, the big terminals with, black and white screens. And I was fascinated by them. And when we got our first computer, I had never touched a computer before. Windows has just been released, and I was wowed by it. And I taught myself basic programming by reading a book on basic and kind of trying it out. So loved it. I found myself just spending my whole summer holidays making games and little programming snippets. And I thought, wow, what if I could do this more? And how can I study this? And computer science was an emerging career at that point. There was not a lot that was structured about it. People just happened to get into computer science. And I decided to explore the opportunity. So when I passed out from school, I found a course, a graduate or undergrad BSc in computer science, which was fantastic. So I tried for that. I sat an entrance exam, I got through, and that's how it all started. So I did my graduation in computer science. Then I went and did a master's in computer science, and not in computer science. I did an MBA in systems, actually, that it was called. So in a way, they taught you how to marry business to technology, which was a wide area, which was not covered at all, because there were either developers in those worlds or there were people who didn't understand technology but understood business. So this was a new emerging area. And I thought, okay, great. This is somewhere where I can really bring some value. So that's how it started. That's how I got into technology. I got my first job as a software engineer, because there was no job which said you could be an architect or a consultant. So I started doing that. And then from there on, obviously progressed through being a consultant and getting into the business side of stuff as well.
Okay, and in terms of from that first job to where you are now, at Mulesoft, can you just give us a sort of quick overview of where you've been and how you've got to where you are now?
Absolutely. So, like I said, my first job was a software engineer, and it was interesting. I just like, getting my hands dirty, learning how to program, and solving business problems. So, what I really enjoyed doing was talking to end users and looking at the business requirements and then looking at alternative ways of solving it, which was very few developers actually wanted to get into it, because they really just wanted to stay with their code. So for me, both sides were quite interesting. So that actually opened up quite a few opportunities for me, because I didn't realize it at the time that was a unique perspective that I brought, which a lot of the senior people in the team, they were not called architects, but they were architects if you name them today, appreciated having that point of view. So I started with a lot of consultancies. I worked for Oracle at that point, and Oracle ERP was the big thing, like today Salesforce is. ERP was a new technology. People were talking about it because ERP solved business problems. I was actually, when I was hired from my university, I was hired to do Java programming. But when I joined, I said, well, don't want to do programming. Put me on something that's interesting. So my options out of my research were either I go into Oracle ERP or SAP, because those were the only two things that existed. So I got an opportunity to, parachuted into a red Oracle program. I worked like till 3 a.m. because I had to first learn and then do stuff. I didn't mind. I mean, at that point, I was younger. So I kind of progressed from there into a consulting role, because that's where people were doing the business and technology mapping. From there, I moved into an architect role. And then my first architect role was really interesting, because it was still quite a technology focused role, but I had a lot of interaction with the actual business users who were going to use the system. And that's where I really found my niche. And then from there, I came into Salesforce 7 years ago. So the Salesforce called me, and at that point, I knew that SaaS was, hot in the market. Everyone was talking about cloud and cloud architecture. I myself was getting into cloud a little bit. So I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to, work with the industry leader in this space. So I joined Salesforce. And then at that point, I was already an enterprise architect. In Salesforce, I joined as a executive advisor. And then I took on a leadership role. When we acquired Mulesoft, I was asked to build this team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa from ground up. Actually, there was no team which existed. So I thought that, oh, what a great opportunity. I almost, get to do a startup within an enterprise, which is fantastic. So I took this on, and it's been more than 3.5 years now that this team's established, and I've been running this team.
And so you make it sound sort of almost seamless and effortless where you've got to, but I'm just wondering whether there were various challenges along the way, and bearing in mind the sort of focus for the series of videos I'm doing, do you think any of them were to do with the fact that you're a woman, or because you were coming into a fairly new environment, and as you've explained, you had a slightly different perspective from many others, you found there weren't so many problems as you went along?
Oh, many challenges. It wasn't seamless at all. In fact, my first set of challenges even started at university, where I was one of the 2 women in the whole computer science department. And we were the only 2 people who actually even turned up and did our assignments. There's no reflection on boys here, but it just worked like that in university. And I remember my final year exam, I topped. And after that, there was what they called as a practical exam, where you actually had to write a program and then explain what you did and your project to a professor. And instead of asking me about my project, my professor asked me why I took computer science. So it was so unusual for him to see a woman there, and a woman actually topping their department, that he couldn't believe it. So it was strange. There was always a sense of weirdness around the 2 women in the department. Then when I got my first job, again, one of maybe, again, 2 women in the whole intake in that, software engineering group. And of course, throughout, I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and I've never really had colleagues who were women, who were in the same kind of technology profile as me. I've had colleagues who were women, who were maybe project managers. I've had some on the sales side. I've had many on the marketing side. But technology was not an area where, I have at least had the privilege to work with other women. I was always the only one in the room. And the challenge there was credibility. Nobody gave me the same credibility, or trust immediately that they would give to maybe a male colleague who looked more like they could do the technology than I could. And I think it was a lot of stereotyping in those days. And I'm talking about 20 years, ago when I started my career. Architects weren't meant to look like me. There were no women architects who were standing and whiteboarding, who were talking about technology, who were talking about implementations and design patterns. So it was a hard thing for people to take. So the key challenge I faced was when I said something which was right or different or revolutionary, I always needed allies to back me up in the room, allies who were males, allies who had the credibility, who had more years of experience than me, or who looked different than me. And that was a key challenge I faced throughout my career. And that's why when I started coming into senior roles, I always made it a point that I was an ally for different people to show up as architects, especially women, especially encouraging young women to take computer science as subjects or STEM subjects, and coming into technology and exploring this as an area that they would like to go into. Whereas for me, I found it very difficult to see role models, because any role I wanted to go in, I couldn't see someone who looked like me, or who was even a woman who was doing like a senior chief architect role or a senior CIO role, or who was an enterprise architect, because the moment you thought about an enterprise architect, you got a certain picture in your mind to say. And if I walked in, I'll tell you an anecdote. I walked into a graduate recruitment program. So I was senior enough. I was a managing director. I was managing an Oracle ERP practice in one of the consultings I work with. We were doing a graduate recruitment day. And I walked into the interviewer's room because I was one of the heads of practices. So I was hiring. And there was one other person who was already in the room. When I walked in, he asked me, "You're in the wrong room." So he expected me to be in the students' room. I said, "Nope, I'm in the right room." And he was visibly surprised at me being in a technology practice leader role. And that's just one of the little anecdotes. I could tell you many in the 20 years that I've faced, but it's just stuff like that. It's always challenging to gain the credibility. I've always had to work extra hard, be extra prepared for meetings, go in with more data, more evidence, and almost gather my allies before the meeting, have a meeting before the meeting, so that in the meeting, if I wasn't trusted, I could pull in that evidence and data and sponsorship to prove my point, which I don't think my other colleagues went through. So I think that was a challenge, and still a challenge. It's not changed. Things are changing now. It's much better, but it's definitely not where it needs to be, where it's a de facto to see a woman come in and just know her stuff about technology and be a thought leader.
Yeah, you just ended there saying, yeah, things have begun to change, at least. You've been in the industry a long time. Are you sort of optimistic that things are changing fast, and therefore in a few years' time, sort of equality, parity, whatever, will be fully achieved? Or you're still a little bit surprised and perhaps disappointed that shall we say, the traditional attitudes and approaches are still rather more prevalent in companies than you'd like to see?
I can see things are changing in sense of awareness. I can see a lot of people talk about it. Organizations, especially grateful that Salesforce, does a lot to make people aware. Their trainings, their anti-bias programs. There's a lot on equality groups going on here. However, I'm not optimistic it's going to change in a few years. I don't think it's going to change in my generation, if I can tell you that. I don't think my generation will get to the point of equality or an equal representation in senior levels, because there's just a generation of women who are missing from the industry. It's difficult to get them back. And if you get them back, they're not going to be at that level because they just won't have the experience to be at that level. So I think it'll take a generation or two, if we are, if we carry on the momentum, we are optimistic, everyone does things right, to get there. Because then we are saying we have to inspire young women to take up technology as a career. Then we have to make sure they don't drop off in their 20s and 30s, to do childcare, and they stay in the industry and they come back and they grow and they choose to be ambitious with their career and they go into those senior roles. So it's a long journey. What I do see is what is positive is that we are talking about it, that we are educating people. Whereas when I started, it wasn't a thing. Like being equal, microaggression wasn't heard of. People have got away with saying stuff to me, which today, if I think back, I was like, oh, that was a lot of aggression, towards me. But now there's a lot of awareness. Corporate organizations have realized they need the representation to do well in their business, which is fantastic. But I think the pace of change is extremely slow because there's a momentum and there's a drag and there's an inertia. And it cannot, I don't see it changing fast enough, though we could have. But then at the grassroots level, it's very difficult to apply. I mean, training is one thing, but it takes a mindset change. And a mindset change is pretty difficult to achieve in human beings, especially if things have been for a certain way 100 years. It's difficult to just switch over to a mindset. So I think things are changing, but they're changing very, very slowly. So I don't think it's going to change in a few years. But what I do see is if people speak up more, if people show up more, if they see more role models, if we continue the push and increase the momentum of the push, then yes, I can see it changing down the line.
And in terms of sort of accelerating the progress, or at least making more progress, where do you think the balance of responsibility lies between, I mean, organisations themselves, like the one you work for, the initiatives that they need to implement, whether it's high level government need to push diversity, equality more, and then maybe the early years, a couple of people I've talked to mentioned that obviously getting people early on at school and further education to explain the exciting opportunities in IT. So just your thoughts as to how more progress might be made.
I think the responsibility lies at every single level. It's not no one person or one group's responsibility to make this happen, because it's a systematic problem. And a systematic problem cannot be fixed by one part of the society. So while organizations like Salesforce definitely are doing their part in raising awareness, creating policies, training their managers to recognize bias and recognize how to give equitable opportunities to people to grow, it also comes down to our education system. It also comes down to us as individuals to raise our children in a way that they don't think or they don't grow up with their biases. It is up to us to teach our children how to recognize equitable opportunities and how to treat inclusion as a standard part of their attitudes. And by that, I can tell you, I have a 10-year-old son in school, and I see it at the grassroots level in schools, that the activities that girls naturally gravitate to and boys naturally gravitate to are different. But sometimes schools even put them in the same slot on the same day because they just know that girls would do the dance and guys would do the football. But why not have them on different days? Why not encourage more boys to go into dancing and more girls to go into football? It's basic stuff. We create the barriers in our children's mind. I have friends with teenage daughters who want me to talk to them because they are good at maths, they're good at science, but they don't want to take that as subjects in their A-levels or universities because their friends are not doing that. So there's a lot of peer pressure there as well. So there are girls who maybe naturally are inclined to do more STEM subjects, but they get into this social pressure of being with the other girls and doing what's conventional for the girls to do. There are very few girls who actually, like me, stand up and say, wow, I don't care if I'm the only woman in a computer science department of 150, because I'm fine with myself, right? It's a very difficult thing for teenagers to do. So why I got through? Well, because my parents were very supportive. I think my dad's one of the earliest equality champions I've seen. He always gave me the mindset to be, well, don't be afraid to be different, right? Do what you think is right. Don't get carried away by what others are doing around you. But I think we need parents to do more with children at school level, at college level, those formative years, give them the courage to be different, show them the opportunities to do unconventional career opportunities that maybe other girls aren't pursuing. And when a few start doing it, it will create that knock-on impact. It will take away the social pressure of being seen in a certain kind. Our stereotypes, I cringe when I see our departmental stores of pinks and blues and grays. Let's just get rid of those stereotypes. Let's just, the colors have nothing to do with gender, or colors have nothing to do with whether you're a boy or girl, or whatever you identify yourself with. Just let's get rid of the basic biases we build unconsciously within our society. And of course, organizations like Salesforce could do more. Other organizations, retail organizations, could do more to take away. A lot of organizations are now looking at gender neutral clothing and gender neutral marketing. So all step in the right direction, but again, very slow for the society to pick up. So everything has to change for a materialistic change to happen.
And do you think the IT industry, in terms of role models, because role models can be quite powerful, not just obviously in the IT industry, in many walks of life, do you think part of the problem might be that typically the IT folks that everyone sees day to day are the Elon Musk of this world or the Bill Gates? So everyone again just reinforcing that stereotype that you've got to be a sort of geeky bloke to get on in the IT industry. And is there a way, because clearly you can't sort of artificially create, IT heroes if they're not, at that level. But how do you think get better role models for diversity and for women?
Yeah, and that is a key problem of role models. Like I said, even when I was a younger woman in IT, I didn't see what the next role could be for me could look like, because there was no one who looked like me, or even a woman who was doing that next level role. Similarly, like you said, the Elon Musk of the world and the Bill Gates of the world set a image in your mind of a CEO. And there was an experiment, where they said, children, close your eyes and imagine a CEO and describe it. And everyone described a male of a certain age. But there was no one who said, oh, I see a young woman or an Asian woman or, a woman of color as a CEO. So it's difficult to be what you don't see. And that's why I said the change cannot be instant, because there is no instant fix to this. But the change is, if we carry on retaining the women who are already in senior roles and give them the opportunities to grow. And by giving them the opportunities to grow, I want to be very clear, it's not about promoting women because they're women. It's about creating an equitable and inclusive environment and a process which is not rigged against them, a process which would consider their strengths as being strengths of executive leaders, which we are now coming up with. Empathy is coming up as a big leadership skill. So everyone is realizing, well, yes, to be a successful leader, you have to be an empathetic leader. You have to have a wide perspective of life. You have to have tolerance. Well, everything that women have probably naturally, but was never seen as an executive leadership skill. You don't have to constantly be an alpha or show up as, a big bloke with an ego to be an executive. But the system is rigged, because that's how people are trained to think about execs. If we start giving women the opportunity to show up in those roles and then showcase those women more, give them the media light, or give them the opportunity to shine, and give other people the opportunity to look at them and say, it is possible. I mean, I was very inspired by Indra Nooyi, for example, when she was the PepsiCo CEO. She was a woman of color. She was leading, of a top Fortune company. And it was fantastic to see someone like her do it, because I'm sure she inspired many women to think, yeah, it can be done. And we just need more CEOs and CIOs and CTOs like that to show up. And for women who get there, again, I feel there's a sense of responsibility that if you're in a leadership position, you need to step out and not be afraid of, the focus on you, and just step out, be yourself, and say, I've done this. Yes, I've had my struggles, but I'm here and I'm ready to help other people to achieve it. So I feel it's a shared responsibility between people who've been able to navigate it, for them to show others how to do it, but also to create an equitable environment where different skills can get to that exact level and break the bias. So it will take time, because like I said, there are very few senior women right now, but then the next generation is coming up in a few years' time. So let's create those opportunities at every level so that they can continue growing.
Yeah, and that's interesting, the next generation, because we're all familiar with the fact that the IT industry is losing skills and is expanding, so there aren't enough to replace, etc. So do you think that is a good opportunity, that large amounts of people are required to come into the industry, and if even if I put it in a sort of slightly depressing tone, therefore the companies will be more embracing, they'll be less fussy if they ever were, just because they need people, so they will be more open to the candidates, as opposed to having their own view of the best people to fill a role, because they will need to, there are so many roles that are going to need to be done. Is that fair to say?
I think so, yes. At that level, because the intake is going to be more, because technology is expanding, there's constant need of new skills. So obviously graduates are a very, very good place to start, the entry-level career entrance. If we get our balance right there, and if we embrace diverse talent there, that's a great place to start building those skills for the next generation. I would also like to point out that because skills in IT are changing so rapidly, There are technologies out there which nobody has worked in. I mean, even if you've been in the industry for 30 years, you haven't. So I treat that as a leveler. I see that someone maybe even in the middle of their, life, maybe who've been out of the industry, who want to reskill themselves and get into IT. This is the opportunity. Identify those skills that are needed, that are new, that are upcoming, get trained, get jobs in that, because that's a good entry point. So it doesn't have to be a college level graduate getting in. It could be someone at a different level, maybe coming from a different industry with a different skill set and training themselves with some technology skill set. And then it's a win-win because they bring an industry or a business perspective, and now they've got technology skills. And hence they start maybe not at the bottom of the entry level career, but somewhere in the mid-level, and it gives them the opportunity to rise. So there are opportunities to get in, and that's why I feel that technology is such a great industry, where if we do it right, we have the opportunity, because no one's born with these skills. My skills are going to be obsolete in a few years if I don't constantly update and learn new stuff. And it applies to everyone. So I think, again, this creates a very equitable field, because it's up to you to go and learn new skills and identify those skills and upskill yourselves to stay in the industry, which is a fantastic opportunity for us to take in diverse talent.
Okay, just before we finish, if there was, we've covered quite a lot of ground, and you've given us plenty of observations, food for thought, but if there was maybe one or two things you could change about the IT industry, and whether that's related to what we've been discussing or just more generally, are there a couple of things obvious things you think this, we need to do this, or we must stop doing that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we need to stop looking for 10 years experience of everything we hire into. Like I said, tech is a very learnable skill, and people from different backgrounds can add a lot of value to tech because they bring in perspective to the technology, which is then used to solve those same business problems that they come from. So I think we need to train our hiring managers and recruiters to look for potential rather than experience. Is a change in trend that I am advocating in my team. And I know Salesforce advocates for it as well. So the way we train our hiring team is, of course, there's an anti-bias primer that we, a training that every hiring team has to go through, whether they're a manager or not, whether they're just interviewers, they still have to go through that training. So that's great. We're teaching them how to recognize their own biases. But the other factor is, when we are recruiting, we should stop looking at experience as the sole factor of a candidate making a shortlist. We should at least talk to a candidate, at least give them a chance to come and prove what's their value add to the role, because technology is learnable. Like I said, it's not something you cannot ever learn. All of us in our lifetimes have learned technology, whether it being moving from our landline calls to using touch phones today. Everybody has learned. Even my grandmother has learned how to use technology and do FaceTime calls. So it's a learnable skill. So we should open our mind. I would like to see the IT industry changing its hiring tactics to bring in more diverse talent, to bring in a different perspective, different sets of talent from different industries. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, the opportunities at the exec level are zero to none. There's always a glass ceiling. And there's no easy way to change this apart from the existing executives, opening up their minds and thinking about how do we bring more representation into boardrooms. And if we do that, that means at the board level, there'll be decisions which will be more inclusive and which will then trickle down, at the employee level or even the graduate levels, and things will start changing. So those are the two things which I think are key levers for us to change the way we hire and change the way we promote within organizations.
Okay, well, it's been brilliant to chat to you, and thank you for giving me the time and some great insights you shared with us. So, Emely, again, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.